It's strange, isn't it? How entire subway systems, grand, ambitious plans meant to redefine the way that we live, can just move and vanish. Erased not by war, not by disaster, but by silence, by a mix of bureaucracy, politics, timings, and sometimes just bad luck. Yet all across North America, beneath the pavement or inside dusty city archives, the ghosts of these never-built subway systems still linger. Last time, we explored 4 different cities which once had bold subway ambitions and ended up scrapped, scaled down, or just left to decay. But that's only the beginning. Because this story, this North American story of missed opportunities and forgotten futures, is much, much bigger. In this video, we'll dive into 4 more cities: Los Angeles, California, Detroit, Michigan, Montreal, Quebec, and Buffalo, New York. This is the Lost Subways of North America, Part 2. Let's start in the City of Angels, Los Angeles. When you think of Los Angeles, chances are your first thought isn't subway. It's traffic, it's freeways, it's the car baked into the identity of the city like palm trees and smog. But Los Angeles wasn't always a car city. In fact, there was a time when Los Angeles had one of the largest electric railway systems in the world. Bigger than Chicago, bigger than Boston, and yes, bigger than New York. They called it the Pacific Electric Railway, or the Red Cars. At its peak in the 1920s, it spanned over 1,000 miles of track, connecting downtown Los Angeles to San Bernardino, Long Beach, Santa Monica, and dozens of places in between. But as the car took over, the red cars began to disappear. The lines were slowly ripped up or paved over, and by the 1960s, the dream of rail-based transit in LA was officially dead. Or was it? Because underneath the surface, literally and figuratively, Los Angeles had never given up on the idea of a subway. So let's go back to 1925. That year, the city passed Measure B, a bond issue to build an actual subway under downtown LA. The traffic, even back then, was getting out of control, and so the idea was simple: create an underground loop to shuttle passengers quickly beneath the gridlock streets. And amazingly, they built it. By 1925, the Hollywood subway, also known as the Belmont Tunnel, was carrying thousands of passengers daily from downtown to the edges of the Hollywood Hills. But the dream stopped there. Plans to expand the system, north, south, and even towards Santa Monica, never materialized. Then, in the 1970s, another subway plan emerged. It was bold, expensive, and politically explosive. The Wilshire Corridor was the centerpiece. Wilshire Boulevard is one of the busiest transit corridors in the United States, and planners saw it as the perfect spine for a new subway line stretching all the way from downtown LA to Beverly Hills, Westwood, and eventually Santa Monica. In the 1980s, Proposition A passed, finally providing the funding to make it happen. And construction began. But then, disaster struck. In 1985, an explosion during the subway tunneling near 3rd and Fairfax sent a massive fireball into the air. The blast injured 21 people and caused serious damage. Even worse, it was the final nail in the coffin for the political support. Fears over geopolitical instability, combined with the escalating costs and local opposition, led to a federal ban on subway tunneling under Wilshire Boulevard, a ban that would last over 20 years. So what was supposed to be a city-wide system became just a short stub, the red line running from Union Station to North Hollywood. And here's the thing, if you look at LA's Metro original plans from the 1980s, it's heartbreaking. The map shows what could have been: a full Wilshire line to Santa Monica, a San Fernando Valley connector, a southbound line to LAX, and eastward extensions reaching deep into working-class neighborhoods that still rely on crowded buses today. All of it drawn up, voted on, particularly funded, and then mostly abandoned. Now, to be fair, the LA Metro has slowly been crawling its way back. In 2023, the D-line extension along Wilshire finally resumed tunneling, aiming to bring rail back to areas once written off for decades. There's talk of connecting it to LAX, of building new light rail, of finishing the dream. But it's been a battle, and every mile of subway in Los Angeles has come at enormous cost, not just in dollars, but in time, political capital, and public trust. And so today, Los Angeles has a subway, but it's a shadow of what it could have been. If just a few things had gone differently, if Measure B had funded more than just one tunnel, if the Fairfax explosion hadn't happened, if voters had supported a 1990s bond measure to expand westward, we might be looking at a Los Angeles where subways, not freeways, defined the landscape, where commuting by train was as normal as driving, where the sprawl had a spine, and where our car culture was just another myth. But instead, we're left with fragments, abandoned tunnels, unfinished dreams, and a city still choking on its own traffic. Well, let's head next to the Motor City, Detroit. Detroit was once the fastest growing city in America. At the turn of the 20th century, it was a place of promise. Factories hummed, houses rising, and cars rolling off the line. A population doubling every 2 decades. But by the 1950s, Detroit was the fourth largest city in the United States, behind only New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. So you'd think, with that kind of explosive growth, a subway system would have been a no-brainer. And for just a moment, it almost happened. The first proposal came in 1915, when Mayor Oscar Marx pushed for a citywide subway system modeled after Boston and New York. Back then, traffic congestion downtown was already reaching crisis levels, and underground railway seemed like the obvious next step. The plan called for 47 miles of track, connecting Grand Circus Park to outlying districts like Hammerock, Highland Park, and even the rapidly growing West Side. But every attempt to pass a bond measure failed. Too expensive, too ambitious, too early. Then came the 1920s. Detroit was at its industrial peak. The automotive industry was flooding the streets with workers, and traffic had gotten unbearable. Planners revived the subway idea, this time with the backing of business leaders, and once again, voters rejected it. And yet, the city kept trying. In 1926, and again in 1929, and again in 1937, Detroit proposed different variations of a downtown subway loop. Each time, the plan made it to a public vote, and each time it failed. The reasons were always the same. This is a car town. We can't afford it. The roads are good enough. But the final nail in the coffin came after World War II. In 1945, President Truman approved funding for a subway system in Detroit as part of a national post-war infrastructure push. It was supposed to be transformative. A 19-mile core line, 4 main arteries reaching out towards the suburbs, all integrated with buses and streetcars. Detroit accepted the funding. It was ready. And then, it stalled for 6 years. By the time the city began seriously planning the project, it became 1951. And by then, something had changed. People were leaving the city at record numbers, while flight, suburbanization, and highway construction were pulling Detroit's tax base further and further away from the urban core. Car ownership had exploded. The city's population was hollowing out from the inside. So instead of breaking ground on a subway, Detroit canceled it. The federal money was relocated, and the dream, years in the making, was buried. Ironically, it was the automobile, Detroit's greatest export, that killed the subway before it even had a chance. But why build trains when your entire economy is based on not needing them? The big 3 automakers, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, had no interest in seeing a public transit revival, and the city, facing mounting racial tensions, budget issues, and political dysfunction, slowly gave up. By the 1970s, the city was in decline, and by the 1980s, it was in free fall. But that's not where the story ends, because in 1987, Detroit finally opened its first and only subway-esque line, the Detroit People Mover. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. The People Mover is a single-track elevated loop that circles downtown Detroit. It's fully automated, quiet, clean, and nearly always empty. Built for 100,000 daily riders, it rarely sees more than a few thousand. In some stations, you can hear your own footsteps echoing as you walk down the platform. It's surreal. It feels less like a transit system and more like a ghost of the subway Detroit never got. There are tunnels under Detroit. There are abandoned stations. There are abandoned blueprints locked in drawers and digital archives showing what could have been. a subway under Woodward Avenue, a crosstown connector beneath Jefferson Street, a downtown loop integrated with a regional trail to Ann Arbor, but none of it came to pass. And today, Detroit is trying to rebuild, slowly. In 2017, the Q Line opened, a modern streetcar on Woodward Avenue. It's sleek, new, and deeply underused. Critics say it's too slow, too short, and doesn't connect to anything useful, but for transit advocates, it's a fragile beginning. Proof that Detroit hasn't fully given up on the idea of rail, even if it's 70 years down the line. What happened in Detroit is a warning. It shows how quickly a dream can die and how long the consequences last. Because subways aren't just about trains, they're about how a city sees itself, what it values, who it serves, and what it's willing to invest in when the future seems uncertain. Detroit bet on cars, and for a while, it worked. But when the industry collapsed, the city was left with no plan B. No subway, no regional rail, just wide roads, crumbling freeways, and a single monorail circling an empty downtown. So now, we're going to Montreal, Quebec. And don't forget, if you like what you see, take this moment now to please subscribe, like, and leave a comment down below if you like our exploration together. But now, back to the video. Montreal, a city that did build a subway, but lost something along the way. While other North American cities were still debating whether they needed subways at all, Montreal built one. Fast, ambitious, beautiful, and completely its own. But this city isn't about Montreal's subway succeeding. It's about how it stopped and what was lost when the trains never crossed the river. Let's go back to 1961. Montreal had been growing rapidly. The population was approaching 2.5 million. The downtown core was dense, vibrant, and increasingly gridlocked with cars. Streetcars were being phased out, but buses couldn't keep up. And with Expo 67 on the horizon, the city was desperate to modernize. So under Mayor Jean Drapeau, the city did the unthinkable. They broke ground on a brand new subway system called the Metro, entirely independent from Toronto, New York, or Boston's designs. It would be underground, it would be clean, and it would run on rubber tires, a rare technology borrowed from Paris, making it smoother, quieter, and better suited to Montreal's steep grades and bitter winters. Although, the subway lines would be fully underground. Construction moved fast, and by October 1966, the first trains were rolling beneath the city. But here's where things take a strange turn. You see, Montreal's original subway plan was much bigger. Initial blueprints from the early 60s showed 5 major lines, some stretching far beyond the island of Montreal, also known as the Île de Montréal, east to Longueuil, west to Dorval and La Chienne, north across the Rivière des Prairies into Laval. But in the end, only a fraction got built. Why? Well, politics, language, money, geography, and a deep growing divide between the island and its suburbs. When the first phase of the metro opened, it had only 26 stations. All were within the urban core, serving francophone neighborhoods, working class areas, and Expo 67's futuristic new islands on the St. Lawrence. Suburban mayors, many of whom were English-speaking, begged the city to extend the system into their municipalities. But Jean Drapeau refused. It was a stark political line, one that reflected the city's fractured identity at the time. English versus French, urban versus suburban, old money versus rising nationalism. So while Toronto's subway reached its suburbs by the 1970s, Montreal's remained trapped on the island. Even as ridership surged, even as highways clogged, even as low-density developments exploded in Laval, Longueuil, and the West Island, the Montreal Metro stayed small and isolated. Although there were attempts. In 1970, a serious plan was drawn to expand onto North Shore. In 1975, funding was promised for a West Island extension, and in 1980, Longueuil finally got its single station, Jean Drapeau to Longueuil Université de Sherbrooke via the Yellow Line. But after that, nothing for decades. A frozen system, a subway that worked beautifully within the island, but ignored everything outside of it. Today, Montreal's metro has 68 stations, while Toronto, even with a larger population, has 70, and a growing network of regional trains on top of it. Meanwhile, Montreal has no GO Transit, no rapid express rail, and until very recently, no credible regional rail. And here's the irony. Montreal was once considered more transit-friendly than Toronto. Its metro was faster, more frequent, more integrated with buses, and it carried nearly 1 million riders a day at its peak in the mid-2000s, despite having no real suburban reach. So what happened? Why did the metro never escape the island? Well, the answers are messy. Part of it was the cost. Montreal's metro is 100% underground, meaning expansion is brutally expensive compared to surface or elevated lines. This was done due to the harsh winters in Montreal. And part of it was provincial politics. Quebec's shifting priorities and chronic underfunding of the Montreal infrastructure slowed every new project. And part of it was vision. For decades, Montreal's planners simply didn't plan for growth beyond the island. Suburbs were an afterthought, and when they finally did build something new, like the Orange Line to Laval, it came 40 years too late. But now, things are changing. In 2023, Montreal launched the REM, Réseau Express Métropolitain, a brand new electric light metro stretching to the suburbs. It's fast, modern, and entirely automated. On paper, it looks like what Montreal needed 40 years ago, but critics argue it's disconnected from the metro. Privately operated, and worst of all, it still doesn't serve the West Island properly. So even now, Montreal's rail puzzle remains incomplete. And even though Montreal did build a subway, and for a while it was everything a city could dream of, the demand for it quickly surpassed its capacity and has remained mostly stagnant ever since. But next, we head to Buffalo, a city that built a subway when its population was already falling, and what followed was stranger than what anyone had expected. If you want to see the ghost of a dream, go to Buffalo. Walk past the shuttered department stores, the empty lots, the buildings trapped in time, and then take the escalator underground. Because beneath the streets of a sinking Rust Belt city, there's something strange, something rare. A subway line, still running, still alive, even though it was born too late. Buffalo wasn't supposed to end up like this. In the early 1900s, it was one of America's richest cities per capita. A booming inland port driven by the Erie Canal and Great Lakes shipping. Downtown Buffalo was dense, electric, and forward-looking. But by the 1920s, planners had already proposed a subway to match the city's ambitions. But then, the Great Depression killed those plans. After came the suburban sprawl, flight, and economic collapse. And by the 1970s, Buffalo was losing people. Fast. And that's exactly when somebody had the idea, let's build a subway. In 1973, Buffalo secured a $500 million grant from the federal government to build a modern light rail system, something sleek and clean to breathe life back into the city core. But the original vision was massive. A full metro stretching from the South Towns to the university at Buffalo's North Campus and with multiple branches and connections to the airport. Then, reality hit. By the time construction started in the late 70s, the plan had been slashed again and again. Budget overruns, lawsuits, utility relocation nightmares. The scope shrank. The number of stations dropped. Tunnels were shortened or eliminated. And when the Buffalo Metro Rail finally opened in 1985, it was no longer a grand citywide network. It was a single line. 6.4 miles, just 14 stations, with half of it above ground, running right down the middle of Main Street. And here's where the story gets weird. To make the surface section pedestrian-friendly, the city closed Main Street to cars entirely. They hoped the new rail would turn the corridor into a lively, European-style transit mall. But instead, businesses fled. The street became empty, storefronts closed, foot traffic dropped, and downtown Buffalo, an already struggling core, became even more desolate. The new subway? It ran on time. It was clean, but hardly anyone used it. And to make things worse, the Metro Rail was never extended. Even through North Campus of the University of Buffalo, the region's single largest trip generator sits just 6 miles away. The subway stopped short at South Campus, forcing a transfer to a bus. Every few years, somebody proposes an extension, and every time, it dies in committee. In over 40 years, not a single new station has been added. And yet, the trains still run. Every 10 minutes from Keybank Center to University Station, from the glass canopies of Canalside to the vast emptiness of Allen Medical Campus. The system carries around 15,000 people a day, less than most city bus lines, but it's still maintained, still staffed, and still operated by the Niagara Frontier Transportation Authority, or NFTA for short. It is the smallest full rapid transit system in North America, and it runs through a city that had once imagined so much more. What makes Buffalo subway so haunting isn't just its failure, it's the ghost of potential you can still feel when you ride it. The stations are surprisingly deep and well built. Platforms stretch longer than necessary, waiting for trains that never arrive. Tunnels continue past the last stop, dead ends now, but once meant for expansion. When you ride it, you think, this was supposed to grow. And then you wonder, why didn't it? Well, the answer as always is layered and can be boiled down to population. Buffalo's hemorrhaged population in the late 20th century, dropping from over 530,000 in 1950 to barely 250,000 by the early 2000s. That collapse destroyed the tax base, investors pulled out, and federal interest in transit dried up during the Reagan years. More than anything, the subway's failure wasn't technical. It was timing. Buffalo tried to build big, but it did it in 20 years too late. Still, the system persists. In recent years, parts of Main Street has reopened to cars. New condos have gone up around Canalside, and the University Extension is once again being studied. There's even talk of adding a streetcar line, but deep down, Buffalo subway remains a reminder that even good ideas can fall flat without momentum, vision, or luck, or a mix of all three. And sometimes, the saddest transit stories aren't the ones that never got built, but the ones that did and were left to fade alone. So, today we've explored the other side of lost transit, from cities with dreams that were too small to the ones that never stopped dreaming. So, what do you do with a forgotten subway? Do you bury it deeper? Do you pretend like it never happened? Or do you dig it up, piece by piece, and use it for something? Los Angeles, Detroit, Montreal, Buffalo, these are all cities that each had their own reasons, their own dreams, their own detours and dead ends. Some had too little ambition, others had too much. Some were crushed by bad timing, others by politics or planning. But they all share one thing, a vision of movement that never moved quite far enough. When I made part 1 of this series about Philadelphia, Toronto, Rochester, and Cincinnati, I wasn't quite sure how it would go. But honestly, the response was incredible. To everyone who watched, liked, commented, and shared, thank you. That's the kind of support that means a lot for a small channel like me, and I really do thank you deeply. It also tells me that I'm not the only one who finds beauty in these forgotten things. So, if this video does well, I'll absolutely make a part 3. There's still so many cities to explore in this fascinating subject. Although, I intend on making a different video for the next time. But, let's not forget, San Francisco, Cleveland, Vancouver, even Mexico City, Chicago, or Miami could find a place in this story for next time. And if you have a city in mind, one with a buried rail dream, a lost transit plan, or even a bizarre transportation, what if? Leave a comment down below, and honestly, I read every single one. And who knows, your suggestion might just make the next stop on our journey together. So, if you've enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like, and if you're new here, or coming back from part 1, please hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps this channel grow if you like what you see. We explore urbanism, transit, infrastructure, and strange corners of transportation history. So, thanks again for being here, for taking the time to explore these forgotten tunnels, these unused platforms, and these echoing dreams. Cities are living things, and even when a subway never gets finished or never reaches its potential, the story it tells is still moving. So, this has been Coffee in Transit. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.